I'm Vance Bastian, here with my co-host S.A. Baz Collins for this week's Written on the Edge, Season 10, Episode 8 interview. We'll be talking with Robert Bruegmann and discussing his book, Roman Ivory, a Novel. So let's get to know our guest. Robert Bruegmann is a historian of architecture, landscape, and the built environment. He received his BA from the Principia College in 1970 and his PhD from the University of Pennsylvania in 76. In 1977, he joined the faculty at the University of Illinois at Chicago, where he is currently Distinguished Professor Emeritus of Art History, Architecture, and Urban Planning. He has also taught at the University of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia College of the Arts, MIT, and Columbia University. He is the author or editor of numerous award-winning nonfiction books and articles, and a novel, Roman Ivory, which we are here to discuss today. Robert, welcome to the show.
Very glad to be here.
Well, we're glad you made it. So, why fiction? Long distinguished career in nonfiction. Why the switch?
I'm not sure about that exactly. Part of it was just, well, I get one of the reasons I did this was because one of my projects that I always gave students as an undergraduate was to assign them a monument. That could be the Parthenon or it could be the Paris Opera, and then ask them to write a short piece of fiction where they had to describe what it'd be like to be there, to in there and around there, to any kind of story they wanted that would allow them to talk about what it looked like, what it felt like, smelled like, what it sounded like. And I was always a little bit shocked. I mean, some of the better students produced things that were really spectacular, but most students really couldn't imagine it. They imagined it like architecture history on the page. So,
Okay.
that means there's the facade of Chartres Cathedral. But then the story would go, and it was almost always the same story. I was a 17-year-old boy, and on vacation in Scotland, I met this 17-year-old girl, and we decided to get married, and we went on our honeymoon to Thailand. I mean, this does not happen in the 19th century. And so I thought, well, I'm supposed to know more about these things. Why don't I try my hand at it? So in some ways, that's the origin of it. And in other ways, it was just, I guess it's like almost every author that does a piece of fiction, it's in some manner autobiographical. And in this case, because this was about relationships between men who love men, I think there's a lot of me in there, although very where exactly I am, I mean, even I don't know at this point.
Fair. So, if I were to see Roman Ivory on a book table at a book fair or a Pride event or something and come up to you and say, "What's this about?" What would be your elevator pitch?
I would say it's about the relationships between men who love men in the 19th century. I think that's about all I would probably say. And
Okay.
to go on from there, I would say that um, we know a lot about current current situations like that, and we've known about that since the time of uh, Oscar Wilde. But really, the time before that is another world, and some people think it's a completely different world. That our everything that we know today doesn't apply. I don't think so. I think human nature has been pretty much the same since at least the Greeks, and
Right.
it's just the outward circumstances that change. And I wanted to describe those circumstances, but also the internal dynamics.
Okay. So, focusing on the novel, what sets your character off on his adventure? Because he's looking for answers, right?
Yeah, Robert, the main character, is very startled at the death of his father. That there's a lot of things he didn't know about his father, and he goes to a house that his father owned in St. John Wood in London, and finds a lot of erotic artifacts, and they are mostly um, about male. They're mostly male nude, and this is shocking to him. It's also disturbing to him because he himself is struggling with his sexuality. So he decides that he wants to go on his grand tour of the continent, which most young men of privilege in Britain in that era would do. But one of his goals there, besides finding himself, is to see what he can find out about his father. And when he gets there, he's even more shocked that he knew so little about his father.
Well,
And
it's kind of funny too, because when you have stories like that. While you were saying that, I was flashing to the movie Death at a Funeral, where, the father who has passed, there's in his den, there's artifacts everywhere pointing to gay, 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 and
Yeah,
yet no one acknowledges it. How much we write off if it's not about us, that we just kind of, oh, whatever, but then when it's called to our faces, you kind of can't unsee it, kind of
yeah,
moment.
yeah,
And it sounds like that's what you're talking about here.
yeah,
It's that case of, I need to get to the bottom of this. Why didn't I see this before? It's been here all the time, kind of thing.
yeah. And as an art historian, architectural historian, one of the things that fascinates me is the way so much of the art of that period, which very heavily focused on the nude male as the ideal form of God's creation, how much of that art we now look at as homoerotic. But when you look back at what was said about it, it's startling that nobody seems to say,
Right.
this sculpture of La Danse in front of the Paris Opera, which shows a young man looking like he's just at the moment of orgasm, coming out of this circle of women below. We look at that and we say, "Oh my God, we know what this story is," and yet. From the written record, you would never know that anyone ever thought that. But on the other hand, um, I'm absolutely sure that the men walking by there who were gay were going to see it very
Got
much
the
the way we
message. Yeah.
do.
Yeah, exactly.
They were just
Exactly.
they could not put it in writing in the
Mm.
mid 19th century.
Which is why you get the straight washing of history,
Right.
because a lot of that stuff, even when it was written, if the person died, hear stories of this with like that book Loving, with all these pictures of gay men throughout history, and you have
Right,
all these photographic
right,
evidence, and how much of it was destroyed by family members once the person had passed away. They completely got rid of every ounce of it that they could get their hands on. And it's only because of friends and other loved ones who may have also pictures of certain events and stuff that we even know that these things exist. So it's very easy to say, oh, well, that sort of thing didn't go on. No,
right.
it did. And in fact, it was probably more prolific. It's like, cowboys out in the range. People keep thinking, oh, there was all these wanton women. No, there weren't. There was very few and far between. You had to go to major towns in the big
Right,
west.
right.
Until then, there were a lot. That whole Brokeback Mountain thing, that wasn't a fluke. People seem to think that, but
Yeah,
there's a coded history of that stuff happening
right.
throughout history. And it's amazing how much it was written off and how it continues to be written off by certain historians and archaeologists.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things about this book was trying to talk about this phenomenon where art can say a great many things that you can't say in writing or you can't say in speech. So that I think it's one of the major reasons that people do art is the way it can communicate in a way that nothing else can communicate. And I think certainly in the 19th century, there's this undertone of homophilia that runs through a great deal of what's supposed to be the greatest art of the era. And really, it's only been discussed in the last few decades. Before that, it was almost completely silent.
Right.
Right.
So, as your character Robert goes about his journey, is there anything else that he discovers? Like maybe
Well, he
someone,
certainly discovers a lot about himself, and I think by the end he has realized that he's very much like his father, and because this story is told in two voices, first Robert's voice, and then the voice of Fabrizio, the gallery owner in Paris, whom he meets and with whom he really falls in love. Um, I think that he realizes who he is, and then there's the constant comparison in his mind with his father, and I think in our mind as we're reading the book that these are two people who share a great deal, but also there's a lot of difference due to the age they are when they go to Europe and who it is they see and where they are in life. And so it really opens his eyes to a whole world that he didn't know exist. And I think, again, one of the things that I find so fascinating and I wanted to explore in this book is this way that people obviously knew each other. The gay men who were in positions of power, who were creative people, who were wealthy people, who traveled around Europe, they knew each other. And we know this from letters, we know it from all sorts of sources. And yet, we're still, I think the gay historians, many of them are still captive to this notion that there was no real gay identity in the 19th century. There were gay acts, gay specific sex acts, but
Mm,
there was no gay identity. So we can't talk about the 19th century the way we would talk about gay life today. Well, again, I think that's very unlikely. And I think that it's completely proved by all of the letters that we have and all of the back and forth among people in Europe and the United States in the 19th century. And Robert drops right into that world. This is a world that's just below the surface
mm.
of polite society, but it's there and it's a very strong current that almost everyone that's attuned to that will see, but most of the outside world won't.
Right. Do you, so I have to ask a question about the way your publisher phrased something in the blurb, because it makes it sound like there's a thriller element where he's strapped to a bench in
Well,
the gallery.
no, I mean, it's a murder mystery. There's a murder,
Ah,
there's a little bit of a mystery, but I mean, really, it's just an excuse for talking about three men, really, and the way they relate to each other. So, yeah, there's a murder mystery, but I don't think that's really the main part of this, and I don't think anyone's going to be completely surprised the way it ends up.
interesting. So, a journey of discovery, a murder mystery, and a serious knowledge of history and architecture. This book's got a lot going for it.
Well, let's hope that's the way people will see it. It's the way I see it. And now, if I could just get people other than friends of mine to buy it and to review it and to pass on that information, all would be well.
Well, and we often ask our fans and listeners to leave a review, even if it's just three simple sentences. Who did it
Yeah.
remind you of? Who would this book be good for? And how did it make you feel? It's the simplest
Mhm.
review in the world. Please do so. So, is there anything about Roman Ivory that I didn't think to ask that you would love the world to know?
Oh, I think one of the, I think going back to the motivation for doing the book, I think one of the things that was most interesting to me was how you would do the research for something like this. What exactly did it look like? Paris streets probably looked much the same as they do today, but what did people wear? And how did what was expected when you met somebody in a hotel or a single woman? You would a single woman go out alone? So the research for this was really much more complicated than I thought. A lot of it, at least in terms of the physical appearance of cities and what people would see, comes from Baedeker guides, which are
Mm,
really great for explaining a lot about what the streets look like, what the buildings look like. It would tell you, for example, a lot about how you got around in a city. But then just to figure out how to get from Rome to Paris in the 1850s, before there was a direct train line, this requires some research into timetables and other things. So that was interesting. But the most difficult thing was how to tell this story in words that would have been used in the 19th century and weren't completely anachronistic, but also made sense today.
mm,
So you don't want people to start in this book and go, oh, this is so archaic sounding, but you wanted it to be true to the time. And one of the things that was so fascinating to me, and which I didn't realize at all, is that most of the words, 90% of the words, maybe 95% of the words that were used in the 19th century are still used today.
mm,
Because by that time there were a lot of dictionaries and grammars, and so language has not changed very much. Where it has changed a lot, interestingly enough, is in terms connected with sexuality. And I'm
mm,
not sure why this is, but it's interesting that there is no word for, there's no expression that I know of for having sex. That was apparently not a thing. You could have oral sex, which was gamma hooching, or you could have anal sex, which was sodomizing, but there was no term that encompassed both of those. And this is fascinating to me. You know, a lot of those terms, a lot of the sex terms are same as now and then, but there were some major differences. Not exactly sure why all that was, but I did try to be true to the period in that.
Wow, that's some deep level language study.
Yeah, and it's interesting that there are people out there who have tabulated all the use of the word cock or fuck in the 1880s, 1890s, and how many times it was used. And you just wonder who these people are sitting in their office and with all these novels in front of them, trying to tabulate the use of various sexual terms.
I'll bet you during a happier period there was probably a grant for studying that.
Oh, I am sure there were grants for that. And I'm sure that those are the ones that got the conservative senators up in
Oh,
arms.
first on the chopping block. Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Baz, did you have further questions?
No, I mean, I just find it fascinating because, I've said this on the show before, but my whole idea is that we don't really give perceptions in our lives their due. And this is exactly what you're talking about, what you're writing about, because it's, your character's perception when he's confronted with this thing about his father, and so there's all these filters we judge things and we move through life on, but we don't really pay attention to what those filters are or how we built them in the first place in order to make the decisions that we make in our lives. And I always find that very, very fascinating and very, very um, fertile ground for authors to write about, because it's like the one thing about our humanity that people don't focus on. They just have them. They have their perceptions, they have their preconceived notions, they have their biases. They don't really pay attention to how those were built, how they came upon them, why they're solidified in their lives, that kind of thing. So I commend you for writing along those lines, because that's really, really fun stuff.
Something else that is quite interesting to me is that until recently, it was considered bad form, at least in literary fiction, as opposed to pornography, to actually talk about the sex. So in movies or in novels, the characters go into a room, close the door, and then you
Fade to
get
black.
Yep.
yeah, fade to black, and then after they were done, or maybe
You come
they'll
back from the commercial break.
yeah, maybe they'll even be a little bit more revealing and say after they cleaned up, then
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
such happened. But and I find that very peculiar. If you think that the sex act is uh, a way of interacting that's as important as conversation, as important as anything else in relationships, and is not something that is ought to be hidden away and should in fact be celebrated, then to me it's very odd that until recently we really haven't had that much in the way of describing the actual sexual acts that took place. Of course, there always has been fiction that was filled with sex acts, but much less so with gay fiction. And I think it's partly because a lot of the gay historians and activists didn't want to focus on that. They wanted to focus on who it was that set the movement forward.
Mhm.
And so it's surprising to me that only recently have we seen novels, for example, by Garth Greenwell, that really talk about the actual sexual content. And with him, it goes one step further because he talks about the power dynamics and about how relationships based and sexual acts based on that power dynamics work. So this was very surprising when I read that for the first time. And I think in my book, I try to capture that this is such an integral part of people's character and relationships that you can't just push it aside and not deal with it. It's worth talking about and in detail in order to show how these people are interacting and how that interaction is mediated by and sometimes by making things worse, and sometimes by it's actually very therapeutic in relationships, which is why the sex after a big argument is such an important part of a lot of relationships. So I wanted to do that in a way that I don't think is very common and has never been very common in fiction of any kind, and certainly in gay fiction.
Nice.
Well, that's why I think that, my two literary heroes, Gordon Merrick and John Ritchie, wrote around the same time as each other in the 60s going into the 70s. Merrick wrote for the romantic heart in gay men, and
Mhm.
Ritchie wrote in the lustful carnal part because he was a hustler. And so you have these two literary giants at the time writing about the two different sides. And as a young teen boy who discovered both those writers at the same time, it was revolutionary for me, and it came along at the right time. I was 16 when I found them both in the same bookstore, not side by side because there was no gay fiction section in the bookstore back then. But I often thought it was interesting that they were across from self-help, though. I thought that was really, really interesting that I found those books across from self-help.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I
But
think both of those books were very interesting and informative for me, particularly the Gordon Merrick books, because all of my colleagues discount them. They laugh at them. They think of them as like women's Harlequin
yeah, it's
fiction.
pulp. Yeah, it's queer pulp is what it is.
And for some reason, it seems to just get under their skin that he's always talking about size of the penis. And I don't know why that bothers my
Right. Well,
colleagues.
but he did it also in a very flowery kind of
Yeah.
way because all of his stuff was set like in the 20s to the 40s. So people talked, had a bit of that more literary kind of prose. Just in any writing you went in that period of time, and you look at any of the majors back then, Thomas Wolfe, my husband's favorite book is Look Homeward Angel. I read that and I was making note after note after note of all these way that he phrased things because it was so beautifully written. And so I think that we tend to discount that period, in literary history as fluff, when realistically it was emblematic of that time period. And it's just the way people were, and that I find really wonderful. So for you to write about it in that kind of context in that period and trying to stay true to the lexicography and the way people talked and the prose that they used, the way that they spoke, I think that's wonderful because I don't want that to be lost to time.
Mm-mm.
And I think authors need to kind of embrace that. And even if it's not your forte, go into it because you may find you have colors in your palette and muscles in your writing that you just didn't know existed until you push yourself into that arena.
Right.
Those Gordon Merrick novels, interestingly, it turns out that if you look at the Amazon 100 best LG or bestseller LGBT titles, about 95% of those are more or less self-published, Kindle, um,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
and very often they are these 99-cent or $1.99 segments. So
mm-hmm,
it's like we've
mm-hmm.
gone back to 19th century serialization, and they're very often written by housewives. And these, maybe they aren't written by housewives, but that's what they say on the author's biography,
Yeah,
the
right, right.
housewife
Mm-hmm.
in Omaha.
Written by
And
women for women, really.
and
Right.
those things are they're very formulaic, and a very high percentage of them have the English Duke in the Regency period. It's always the Regency period, who is
Well, it's just
expected
guys look better back then.
is expected to marry the American heiress in order to save the family country estate.
Right,
However, he's in love with a stable boy.
right.
And you know how this is going to end
Yeah, yeah.
after 10 segments. But it's so funny that that formula of the women's romance is now being done in this new fashion, and very often by women who seem to be able to do it much better than the men. So if you go down the list of those, I would say it's probably true that 75% of the ones in that 100 bestseller list are probably written by women. And the number of actual books that you would call literary fiction, probably about 5 out of that
Mm-hmm,
whole list.
mm-hmm.
Right.
Yep, absolutely. Well, you ready for some get to know you questions?
Okay.
Okay, let's give this a go. All right. Well, can you name a movie that was better than the book?
I think Brokeback Mountain was actually better than the book. It's a Annie Proulx is a fabulous writer. That short story is wonderful, but unbelievably, the movie seems to not only not only do justice to the book, but go beyond it just because it's visual as well. Also, the characters are much more attractive than the
Yeah, the
ones
way that they're described. Yeah, yeah.
that Annie Proulx describes. So in that way, it departs dramatically from the book, but I think it adds to the interest of it.
Yeah, I feel that way about Call Me by Your Name too. I
Oh.
like the book, but yeah, I totally get you. I get you on that. All right. So, which fictional character would you like most to be friends with?
Oh, I think that's Achilles,
Oh,
the famous classical hero who I have recently read Madeline Murray's book, The Song of Achilles, which I think is one of the great modern epic novels. I think it's a masterpiece, and the story of Achilles and Patroclus, I think, is just an incredibly interesting story. And besides which, Achilles was supposed to be very handsome, so why not Achilles?
right, right. Why not? All right. Well, what's the most interesting fact that you know?
You know, I'm afraid this one just stumps me. I must be a very uninteresting person, but I am sorry, I cannot dredge up a single fact that I say is really interesting.
All right. Well, we'll
Sorry.
move on along
Okay,
then.
well,
Okay.
can I ask a question then?
Please.
Do you think that the relic hanging in Chartres Cathedral is for real?
Do I think the what?
The relic hanging in Chartres Cathedral is real?
Well, there's lots of relics there. Which one are we talking about?
The big draw is Mary's Veil, right?
Oh, okay. I don't take a position on political matters like that.
Okay.
But
Fair enough.
the relic I like is La Sainte Prépuce, the Holy Foreskin.
Yep.
I think it's incredibly interesting the Catholic Church would come up with
Yep.
that.
Because of course they would. Okay. Well, what was your favorite subject in school?
I think it was history,
Mm,
and but I think it was by default. And I was interested in journalism too, but I think history was the thing that got my attention for lack of anything else.
Nice.
okay. Well, before making a telephone call, do you rehearse what you're going to say?
No, I
I don't either. I don't get that one. I mean,
I
we've had people on who have said yes they do. So that shocked me, but yeah, I'm like you.
I don't know whether that's laziness or just not wanting to have it sound canned, but unless I'm calling a lawyer, I rarely know what I'm going
Well,
to say.
okay, yeah, yeah. Point well made. Okay. All right. Well, what current event or causes are you most passionate about?
Well, I leave it to others to do the big ones, the big political, environmental ones. So I'm gonna fix on dark skies, light pollution, and noise pollution, particularly motorcycles and other completely unnecessary noise generators, uh, gas-powered leaf blowers, for
Yeah,
example.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, that part. All right. If you could visit anywhere in the world, where would that be?
Um, I would I would like to visit one of those South Pacific islands with the thatched roof huts over water.
Like
Um,
Fiji or something?
or Maldives. Is that in
Okay,
the South
Maldives, yeah.
Pacific? I don't know. Yeah.
Mhm.
So I don't think I think I would only want to be there for 3 hours because I don't know what I would do after that. Swim around a little bit, but and then want to go home. But I would love to see them because they look so wonderful. Yeah, I always wonder what people in these resorts, they always show them in a chase lounge.
Yeah.
Really,
How long can you
yeah,
like lay around on a lounge reading a book?
yeah.
All right. Well, who, if anyone, was your first celebrity crush?
Um, oh, I should have an answer for this. Yeah, Wally Cleaver and Leave It to Beaver.
Aw.
Oh,
I
okay.
think he was really hot in a kind of 1950s button-down way.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I could see it. All right. Well, final question. What's your personal favorite recipe that you make? And are you willing to share that recipe?
Now I do cassoulet. I when I was in Paris a junior year abroad, And the woman in the apartment under us gave cooking lessons. And oddly enough, it was only the men in that program that went down for cooking. And cassoulet was the climax of that experience for me. So it's our Christmas. It's our Christmas.
Nice.
Very cool. All right. Well, you made it through the list. Bravo.
Okay.
So what's up
Round
next
of
for you?
applause.
Oh, complete discontinuity here. The next thing I'm doing, or what I'm doing right now, is the 20th anniversary revised edition of Sprawl, A Compact History, which is a polemic about what it is an argument that low density dispersed settlement is not necessarily any worse than dense central cities, and it just serves different purposes, and trying to eliminate it is a fool's errand, because as people become more affluent, they're going to want to have more choice, and a lot of people are going to want to have low density suburban exurban existences. So the first edition of that came out in 2005. It was kind of an academic bestseller. It has been continuously in print. A lot of people use it in classes because it's a classic case of a argument in social sciences. And I think that a lot has happened since 2005. Driverless cars, drone delivery, just endless numbers of things in communications, AI, that are going to have a big effect on the built environment. And this book will try to address what some of that is going to happen.
Nice. So if people want to reach out and contact you, is there a social site that's the best place to do that?
Best way to contact me is through my email, my website, which is robertbruegmann.com, or there is a book website, which is romanivory.com. And
Perfect.
that's the easiest way to reach me.
Excellent. All right. Do you have any final words of wisdom?
No, none.
Awesome. Well, I'd like to extend a huge thank you to Robert Bruegmann for joining us. Robert, thank you so very much.
No, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
It has indeed. And we at Written on the Edge are proud to introduce you to new media by queer content creators. So if you enjoy learning about new artists or hearing our thoughts on entertainment media, please like and subscribe so you get the alerts for new episodes. The show was produced by Rogue Ravens Media. For our disclaimers, links to social media, our listen stations, or to sign up as a guest, visit www.roadpodcast.com. Tune in to us on YouTube. This channel is expanding. We've started to add things like deep dives into current events, as well as working on a history of the gay movements in various parts of the United States and Mexico. So check us out there, because there'll be more there than anywhere else. Tune in next week for your Queer Media Fix.
Bye-bye.
Oh, what's that? Closing time. The bums rush in melody, dear.